So our exclusive guest today is Thomas de Waal, a senior fellow with Carnegie Europe, who is also well-known British journalist, writer. Many people in the Caucasus and in Armenia know him for his book, Black Garden, Armenia and Azerbaijan Through Peace and War. Many thanks, Tom, for your time and for granting this interview. You are now, I think, one of the busiest experts around the world. We read you, we watch you, and now I want you to start the interview by asking you what went wrong this time? Who started the war and why?
Okay, well, first of all, good to be with you, Harry, and to speak to your audience at this very tragic and difficult time. What went wrong? Well, obviously, we can look at some global factors. I think there are some global factors here, which is I guess the disengagement of the United States from this region, which had been a forceful player. The Trump administration has really not paid much attention to this conflict. I think there was one exception in 2018 when John Bolton visited the region, but I think it turned out he was probably more interested in Iran than in Armenia and Azerbaijan. And that was, I think, the only incidence when the United States paid full attention to this issue. Obviously, Europe has its own preoccupations. Russia, I think, also has its own preoccupations. And I've always said, and I think this is confirmed, I think, now, that Russia's influence in this conflict was a bit exaggerated. So I think, as I see what happened, was there was a deep frustration on the Azerbaijani side with Nikol Pashinyan, the new Armenian prime minister, that they expected more from him than dealing with Serge Sargsyan, and in their view, they got less. That there was a positive meeting in Dushanbe between the two leaders when the Azerbaijani side held high hopes for the relationship, and in their view, they improved the security situation. They de-escalated ceasefire violations. They gave the Armenians more security. In return, they wanted more substantial negotiations with Mr. Pashinyan, and according to them, they got less. They got basically some patriotic speeches from Mr. Pashinyan, including one in Karabakh itself. His insistence that the Karabakh Armenians be part of the process, which obviously had not been a talking point for Mr. Sargsyan or Mr. Kocharyan. And they also got, in their view, the indication that the Armenian side was no longer accepting the basic principles framework. So from the Azerbaijani side, they felt they no longer had a negotiating partner, which I think increased their willingness to look at the military option. And I think then they had the extra element, which was the support of President Erdogan's Turkey. And then a few other factors, maybe the approach of winter, the US election. They decided that this was a good moment to try and change the status quo and launch an operation. That's basically my analysis in a couple of minutes of what went wrong.
Tom, here's another question. What is the Turkish role here? Do you think this would have happened without Russia giving green light? Or do you think the Turks just ignored Russia? The same applies to Azeri leader. Many believe that without talking to Russians first, he wouldn't have risked to start the major military operation against Nagorno-Karabakh. What do you think about this?
Well, it's impossible to say, obviously, but personally, I favor the second view, that Russia was taken by surprise by this operation, that they didn't see it coming. Maybe once it started, they were not so reluctant to stop it as they might have been otherwise, because of their difficult relationship with Mr. Pashinyan and some frustrations they feel with Armenia. But my impression is that they didn't give the green light to this, that they were caught by surprise. And indeed, we're struggling to see a Russian response. There was a Russian ceasefire, as we know, which looked like Russia trying to retake the initiative, but the ceasefire has broken down. So Russia's influence here is still very small. I think Russia would ideally like peacekeepers on the ground, but I don't think the Azerbaijani side will accept that. So I think Russia, has always played this equilibrium, this balancing game here, that it wants to have good relations with both parties in this conflict. It wants to try and use its influence by balancing between them. And that's fine once there's a kind of military balance between the parties. But so long, when one side, obviously the Azerbaijani side, wants to upset that military balance, then I think Russia suddenly finds it's got much less influence than it thought.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about this view that prevails now? When you watch the Russian talk shows these days, the propaganda talk shows, you would see the narrative is about Pashinyan. They said Russia would intervene if there is no Pashinyan. They're even they're suggesting that Armenians should get rid of Pashinyan and then we'll come and help you. So this narrative is so disturbing, and it's all over. When you watch all the Channel 1 or the other channels,
right.
This famous Salavio. What do you think about this? Is this?
Well, I can't really comment about whether this is official Russian policy or just official Russian or just public Russian prejudice. I mean, I think it's not. If that is the view, it's not a very strategic view, because Mr. Pashinyan may have done some things that Mr. Putin didn't like. For example, arresting his friend Robert Kocharian. But ultimately, under Pashinyan, Armenia stayed an ally of Moscow. It stayed in all the organizations. It reaffirmed its military commitment to Moscow and economic commitments to Moscow. So I think it would be strange if the Russians really guided their policy on a personal dislike of one individual. I think for them, their influence in this region is governed by having an equal relationship with Armenia and Azerbaijan. So to give Azerbaijan the upper hand is not really very logical. It weakens Russians' influence in the region overall. They may keep their Russian base in Gyumri, but what does it matter if suddenly Azerbaijan is much stronger and is now looking to Turkey rather than Moscow as its main friend?
And Tom, is this war winnable? I mean, is this different than previous times when everybody was saying, military option is not an option. No one can win this war. Do you see that the balance is shifting towards Azeri side? What's your opinion on that?
Well, of course, ultimately, no war is winnable. There's no military solution to any war. Ultimately, there needs to be peace, and certainly, even if the Azerbaijani side were totally to kind of, in quotes, win this war, there would still be no peace, and the Armenian side would not surrender. So that's obviously the first thing to say. But I think what we're seeing some clear indications that the Azerbaijani side thinks it's won the military advantage here. I think its use of drones, Turkish and Israeli drones, they think is a significant factor on their side. And I think they're trying to cut the lines between the supply lines between Armenia and Karabakh. So I think the Armenian side is obviously in a very difficult situation. So I think what will stop and clearly there are many in Baku, possibly including the president himself, who would possibly like to see a full offensive to retake the whole of Karabakh. So I think what will stop that is not necessarily an Armenian military defense. Maybe that's not possible anymore. I don't know. But I think my key point here is that a deterrent on a full Azerbaijani military offensive, I think, if it does come, it will be international, it will be political, it will be pressure on Azerbaijan to say this is unacceptable. I think this is where the diplomatic focus should be on the next few days, to say even people who are quite sympathetic to Azerbaijan, who are quite sympathetic to Azerbaijan's loss of the territories. And let me say that I myself am sympathetic to many Azerbaijan points. I think I also said many times in Yerevan, I may have said it to you, Harry, that the Armenian control of these territories outside Karabakh was unsustainable in the long. So I think even people who believe that the Azerbaijanis have a full right to return home to those territories, as I do, would also say clearly it's unacceptable for Azerbaijan to launch a military operation against the Armenians of Karabakh. So I think this is where we are looking at this moment in this conflict. Does Azerbaijan decide to launch that offensive to capture Karabakh itself, or does it not?
Mm-hmm. And you are also talking strongly, highlighting the terrible suffering being inflicted. This is your commentary on the Armenian civilian population of Nagorno-Karabakh. Can you talk to us about it?
Yeah, well, obviously this is a terrible thing to witness. And for me, it's personal because I've visited Karabakh many times, 10 times, I think, over the years. And I know many people there, and I think it's a beautiful place. I may not agree with the Karabakh political position often, but I certainly wish peace and security on the people of Karabakh. So for me, it's terrible to see the destruction of Stepanakert. I think, and I can see that this is a very terrible situation that they find themselves in. Of course, I'm also commenting on the fact that these Armenian shells and rockets are hitting cities like Ganja. I think that's also terrible. I'm also speaking out on that. I'm making myself maybe unpopular by speaking out on that. But for me, we're seeing a kind of a cycle of revenge, in which only innocent people suffer. And I'm also, I should say, very worried about the kind of information war on both sides. I think this is fueling the military war. The kind of language that is being used by both sides, I find extremely worrying.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that you're highlighting also the European response, and I mean, you describe it as a timid. Europeans are struggling to respond, you say.
Yeah.
Then this is, of course, not a conflict where any of one side has a monopoly on suffering and justice. But Europeans need to speak out urgently on a few basic issues. Please, what's your point on that?
And I would also include the United States. Let me start again. Absolutely, and I would also include the United States here. I would like to see a much stronger response on the humanitarian issues. Again, making the point that the world does not accept that Armenia should control the territories outside Karabakh. I think that there's an international consensus on that outside Armenia, but also the humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding and the unacceptable targeting of civilians. I think this is not sufficiently on the radar, as it were, in Europe and the United States, and I want to see much stronger condemnation of this.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, how about this OSCE Minsk group? You have some criticism about them as well. You describe them as a secretive closed-door mediation, and old style, like Soviet style, Russian style mediation efforts, and you did criticize them for not including as well civic groups and expert community. Please talk about this as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously, the first thing to say is that the ultimate responsibility for a conflict lies not with the mediators, but with the parties to the conflict. It's up to them to solve a conflict. And if they wanted to, Armenia and Azerbaijan could have appointed their own officials to meet and to talk many hours a day in a neutral location, Tbilisi or Geneva. This is how other conflicts get solved. That the Armenian Prime Minister, the Azerbaijani president, would have a representative, that they would meet, that they would talk, and they would try and solve the conflict between themselves. So that's my first point. And I think that hasn't happened for more than 20 years. I think the last time there was a serious bilateral mechanism like that was between Zhira Liberidian and Vafa Gulozadeh. So that's my first point. But having said that, it's unfair to blame the mediators, perhaps. But I also think that the OSCE Minsk group is a conflict management mechanism. It's not a serious mediation mechanism. I think Russia has too central a role. Russia has its own agenda. It doesn't talk to the publics. There are many other actors who could be included who would have a positive contribution, like Europe, like the European Union, who are not there. So I do have criticisms for this, and I would hope that if and when we do get back to mediation, and I hope we will, that it will be a much wider format, as we say, an inclusive format, where more people will be at the table than just the Minsk group co-chairs.
For example, this time we saw French president was really heavily involved in trying to bring both sides to the negotiating table. At least he was trying to call to Trump and then Putin, and it seems to me he was the only one who was really interested, who understood the urgency of start doing something. But you say also that he was doing basically, he was criticizing Turkish role there, but not wider than that. Please, can you talk to us about?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously President Macron has been active, which is more than can be said about the Americans. But I think it's a little unfortunate that he has, as it were, mixing his messages by talking about, he's also obviously criticizing Turkey over Eastern Mediterranean, over Libya and so on. So I think, in my mind, it would be better for, in his statements on this conflict, to focus on the core issues, which are the Armenian and Azerbaijani core issues, because certainly in Azerbaijan, President Macron is perceived as being just basically pro-Armenian. Now, I don't know how that's perceived in Armenia, but that's the perception in Azerbaijan, which is unfortunate. So I would, so he is being sincere, but I'm not sure if his message is being listened to in Baku.
And Tom, but we are having now new unpredictable element in all these processes. That is Turkey, Turkish politics, foreign diplomacy, everything. Turkish diplomacy is so unconventional. We don't know what's going to happen, how they will influence Aliyev. We see now that Azeri troops still continue pressing ahead, attacking on all sides, on the southern side. And we don't know when these guys will stop, pushing Azerbaijan, or what?
Sure.
What's your opinion on this?
Well, I don't have a good answer to this question. Clearly, Turkey's involvement is crucial. Turkish political support, the Turkish drones, I think, is important. And also there's reports which seem to be quite well confirmed of Turkey sending mercenaries from Syria to the conflict zone. So clearly, Turkey's support is very important here. What's not clear to me is the Turkish goal. Does Turkey want to support President Aliyev to the end and see, even if that means mass bloodshed and a big bloody war for Karabakh, or would Mr. Erdogan be content if the Azerbaijanis stop now and declare victory, that they can renegotiate from a stronger position, and that Turkey can declare glory? And this is more about domestic opinion and glory. And in fact, Mr. Erdogan is more bothered about the Middle East than he is about the Caucasus. So which of those two positions is correct, I don't really know.
Yeah. And Tom, what is your solution here? What is yours? How would you solve this problem if you had been, for example, mediator? What would be your advice?
It's a desperate situation. Lots of people are dying. It's really tragic. I'm already hearing from people I know that they know friends who are dying. This has poisoned relations even further between the two nations. If it was possible, I can completely understand the desperate fears of Armenians at the moment. All I would say is that, I would like to see the fighting stop and serious negotiations begin in a wider format, not just Russians, French, Americans, but other European nations, EU, Georgia maybe should be involved, that there should be more people at the table, including the Armenians of Karabakh and also, I would say, the Azerbaijanis of Karabakh. I would like to see a much bigger process, maybe some kind of Minsk conference, which was first conceived of in 1992. That's what I would like to see, but how do we get there from here when we're in a situation of war? I can't say, but that's what I would like to see.